The borderlands had a way of swallowing people whole. Lila Carrington had been disappearing for 3 years now, one careful breath at a time. The Mistwood Forest didn't care about fallen nobles or disgraced names. It only cared about survival, and Lila had become very good at surviving by becoming very good at being invisible. Until the afternoon, the forest itself began to scream. The sound shattered the October stillness like breaking glass, a high, desperate wail that every wolf recognized on an instinctual level, even wolves like Lila who'd been cut off from their pack for so long they'd almost forgotten what connection felt like. A cub. Dying. Close. Lila's hands stilled over the moon petal blossoms she'd been harvesting, her worn basket slipping from fingers that suddenly couldn't remember how to grip. Around her, the mistwood held its breath. Even the birds had gone silent. She'd built a life here in the borderlands, small, quiet, forgettable. She was the pale woman at the market, the one with ghost white hair and features so colorless that children whispered she was half corpse. No one knew she'd once worn silk and gems that her father had stood in the Continental Wolf Council chambers before his execution. No one knew about the dangerous gift sleeping in her blood, the reason her mother had died whispering warnings about hiding. Always hiding. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of keeping her head down, her magic dormant, her heart carefully locked away. But that sound, that terrified, agonized crying of a child, made all of Lila's careful survival instincts go suddenly, catastrophically silent. Her feet were already moving before her mind could catalog all the reasons this was suicide. Whatever was killing a wolf pup in these woods was something she had no business fighting. She had no pack to avenge her death. No allies to mourn her. She was nobody, nothing, a ghost. Already, really, just one that hadn't stopped breathing yet. But 3 years of being nothing hadn't killed the part of Lila that remembered what it meant to be someone. The part that remembered her father's last words, "Your power isn't a curse, little moon. It's a choice." She'd been choosing to hide. Today, for the first time since her world burned down, Lila Carrington chose to matter. The woman who sold moon petal remedies at the Crossroads Market had no name. At least, none that anyone bothered to remember. She arrived before dawn every third day, her cart laden with carefully bundled herbs and tinctures that actually worked, headache drafts that didn't taste like swamp water, burn salves that prevented scarring, fever tonics that could pull a child back from the edge of death. The borderland folk bought from her because her prices were fair and her medicines were good. But they never lingered. Never asked questions. Never quite met her eyes. It was the hair, mostly. That otherworldly platinum blonde that caught moonlight even in broad daylight, paired with skin so pale it looked translucent in certain angles. The children called her the ghost woman when they thought she couldn't hear, though of course she always could. Wolf hearing didn't disappear just because you'd been cast out from your pack, exiled from your territory, erased from every record that had once proclaimed you Lady Lila Carrington, daughter of Duke Matthias Carrington and heir to the Silverbrook estates. But that girl had died 3 years ago in the Capitol Square, even if her body kept walking around. Afterward, Lila arranged her wares with practiced efficiency, her movements economical and unremarkable. Invisibility was a skill she'd honed to perfection. Don't dress too fine or too ragged. Don't speak too educated or too crude. Don't show the herb knowledge that came from a noble education, but don't pretend to be ignorant either. Walk the razor's edge between memorable and forgettable, and always, always land on forgettable. Fever tonic, a woman grunted, not bothering with pleasantries. She placed 3 copper coins on the cart and grabbed the bottle before Lila could even wrap it. The woman's eyes never rose above Lila's collarbone. This was survival. This was safety. This was the life Lila had built from the ashes of everything she'd lost. The memories came anyway, unbidden as they always did when her hands fell idle. Her father's voice, steady even as they led him to the executioner's platform. Your power isn't a curse, little moon. It's a choice. Never let them convince you otherwise. The accusations of treason had been false. She'd known it then, knew it still, but the Continental Wolf Council needed a scapegoat for the poisoning of 3 council members and a duke with unusual views on blood. Magic made for a convenient target. Her mother had lasted 6 months after the execution, grief consuming her more efficiently than any disease. Lila still remembered the way Lady Carrington's hands had trembled as she pressed a bag of coins into her daughter's palm. Hide the gift. Never use it. Promise me, Lila. They'll kill you if they know what you are. Lila had promised. Had kept that promise for 3 years, watching her mother waste away, then fleeing the capital with nothing but a false name and the clothes on her back. The Carrington estates had been seized, the family name stricken from noble records, and every person who'd once called her friend had turned away as if she carried plague. The borderlands didn't care about scandal or nobility. Here, Lila was just another refugee who'd washed up on the edges of civilization. Here, she could breathe, even if every breath tasted like loneliness. A little girl approached the cart, eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. Mama says your hair looks like moonlight, she whispered. Lila's throat tightened. She managed a small smile and handed the child a wrapped candy from her pocket, a kindness she couldn't afford but gave anyway. Tell your mama thank you. The girl scampered off and Lila returned to her careful invisibility, packing away the pieces of herself that still remembered what it felt like to be seen, to be loved, to matter. That afternoon, when the forest began to scream, those buried pieces would claw their way to the surface. Lila found them in a clearing where the autumn light fell wrong, filtered through leaves that seemed to shrink away from what was happening below. The cub was white as fresh snow, small enough that he couldn't be more than 5 years old in human terms. He lay pinned beneath something that shouldn't exist, something that made Lila's wolf recoil in instinctive horror even as her healer's mind tried to catalog what she was seeing. A direwolf. Or what had once been a direwolf before something twisted it into a nightmare. It was massive, easily twice the size of any natural wolf, with fur that looked like it had been dipped in oil slick. Black ichor dripped from fangs too long for its mouth, sizzling where it hit the ground. But the worst part was the eyes, sickly green, glowing with a light that had nothing to do with life and everything to do with the kind of dark magic that had been forbidden since before Lila's grandmother was born. The cub was still crying, though his voice was growing weaker. He'd fought. There were bite marks on the corrupted wolf's legs, pitiful scratches that had accomplished nothing except to make the creature angrier. Now the beast had one massive paw pressed to the cub's throat, and Lila watched in horror as those glowing eyes tracked downward, jaws opening for the killing bite. Every instinct Lila possessed screamed the same word: run. She had no weapons, no pack, no backup. She was a healer, not a warrior, and she'd spent 3 years making sure no one remembered she existed. If she died here, no one would even know to look for her body. The cub's cry fractured into a gurgle as the paw pressed harder. Lila's hand closed around a fallen branch, thick as her forearm, heavy with rot. It was a pathetic weapon against a creature of dark magic. She would die. She knew she would die. The corrupted direwolf would tear her apart before she landed a second blow. But the alternative was watching a child die while she hid in the trees like the ghost everyone already thought she was. Her father's voice echoed across 3 years of silence. "It's a choice, little moon." "I'm sorry, Papa," Lila whispered to the family she'd failed to save, the mother who'd died, making her promise to hide. "I'm sorry, Mama. But I can't watch him die." The direwolf's jaws descended toward the cub's throat. Lila charged. She had no battle cry, no warrior's grace. She just ran, branch raised like a club, every ounce of her meager weight behind the swing. The branch connected with the side of the creature's skull, with a crack that echoed through the clearing. The direwolf's head snapped sideways. For one heartbeat, Lila thought she'd actually heard it. Then it turned those glowing green eyes on her, black ichor dripping from its maw, and Lila understood exactly how prey felt in the instant before death. But the cub was scrambling backward, free, gasping for air. And that, Lila decided as the corrupted wolf lunged for her throat, was worth it. For the first time in 3 years of carefully chosen invisibility, she had chosen to matter. Even if mattering lasted only seconds before the darkness came. The direwolf hit Lila like a landslide of corrupted muscle and hate. They went down together, Lila's back slamming against forest floor hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. She had 1 second to throw her arms up before the creature's claws raked across her torso, shredding through her worn tunic and the skin beneath like paper. Pain exploded white-hot across her ribs, her stomach, her chest, deep gashes that wept red onto the dead leaves. Lila screamed, tried to roll away. The direwolf's jaws closed on her shoulder, fangs punching through muscle to scrape bone, and the scream turned into something animal and raw. This was how she died. Torn apart in a forest clearing where no one would find her. The ghost woman, finally becoming an actual ghost. But her blood was touching the creature's hide now, soaking into that oil-slick fur, and something ancient stirred in Lila's veins. The corruption began to flow. It started as a trickle, foreign darkness seeping into her through the points where the direwolf's teeth met her flesh. Then it became a flood. The twisted magic that animated the beast poured into Lila like liquid fire, burning through her blood, scorching through her chest, setting every nerve ending ablaze with agony so intense she couldn't even scream anymore. Her mother's warnings echoed through the pain. Asterisk, hide it. Never use it. They'll kill you if they. No, asterisk. But Lila wasn't using her gift. Her gift was using her awakening after 3 years of forced dormancy, and it was hungry. She could feel the corruption now, not just as pain, but as a presence, a malevolent force that didn't belong in the natural world. Her power latched onto it, recognized it as death, as something that could be drained, consumed, transmuted. Horror and awe warred in Lila's fracturing consciousness. She could drain its life. Not just energy, but the dark magic itself, the twisted essence that made it more than a normal wolf. The cost was agony beyond anything she'd imagined. Her body wasn't meant to channel this much death, this much corruption. It felt like swallowing poison and broken glass, like her veins were trying to tear themselves apart from the inside. Let go, her survival instincts begged. Let go before it kills you. But if she let go, the dire wolf would finish what it started, would turn back to the cub who was still crying somewhere behind her. Lila held on. She pulled the corruption into herself, screaming silently as the dark magic burned through her, feeling her own life force hemorrhaging out with her blood, but refusing to release her grip on the creature. The dire wolf thrashed, confused, as its unnatural strength began to fail. Its glowing eyes flickered, dimmed. When it finally collapsed, Lila was already dying. Her vision was graying at the edges, her heartbeat irregular and fading. She could feel the corruption inside her, a poison that would kill her in minutes if the blood loss didn't finish her first. But she could also feel something else, that last bright thread of her own pure life force, untainted, still hers to give. Lila turned her head. The cub lay nearby, barely breathing, his white fur matted with blood. "Not you," she whispered through lips that were going numb. "Not today." She pressed her bleeding hand to his small chest and let the last of herself flow into him, feeling her gift transform death into life one final time. The cub's heartbeat strengthened beneath her palm. His breathing steadied. Lila smiled and let the darkness take her. Dorian Vale had been tracking his son for 6 hours when he finally caught the scent of blood. Not just blood. Death. Dark magic. And underneath it all, Finn's terror already fading to nothing. The Alpha King ran faster than he'd ever run in his life, his wolf clawing at his control, demanding to be let loose. 6 hours since Finn had slipped away from his guards during a forest walk. 6 hours of mounting dread as the trail led deeper into the mistwood, into territories where even Dorian's patrols rarely ventured. He burst into the clearing and his worst nightmare materialized before him. Blood. Everywhere. A corrupted direwolf dead, thank the gods, but its very presence here meant someone was weaponizing forbidden magic. And Finn, his son, his heir, his entire world, lying motionless in a pool of red. No, the word ripped from Dorian's throat as he lunged forward. No, no, no. Then he saw Finn's chest rise. Fall. Rise again. Alive. His son was alive. Dorian's knees nearly buckled with relief before his tactical mind kicked back in, cataloging the scene. The dead, corrupted beast. Finn's injuries bad but survivable. And the woman. She lay crumpled beside Finn, one pale hand still resting on his son's chest. Her blood had soaked into the ground beneath her, far too much blood for anyone to survive losing. Deep claw marks had shredded her torso. Her shoulder was a mangled ruin where the dire wolf had bitten, down to bone. But she was breathing. Barely. Dorian approached carefully, his wolf suddenly restless in a way that had nothing to do with the danger. He knelt beside the woman, reaching out to check her wounds, to assess if she could be moved or if he'd need to bring healers here. The moment his fingers touched her skin, the world exploded. The mate bond slammed into Dorian like a physical blow, stealing his breath, stopping his heart. His wolf surged to the surface with a roar of recognition that echoed through his entire being. Asterisk mine. Ours. Mate. Asterisk. Impossible. Dorian had stopped believing he had a fated mate years ago. His wife had been chosen, political, dead in childbirth 5 years past. He'd made peace with never feeling this bond that the old stories promised. But here she was, dying in his arms, smelling of moon petals and blood and home. No, Dorian gathered her broken body against his chest, careful of her wounds, his wolf howling in fury. No, you don't get to do this. You don't get to save my son and then leave. The mate bond pulsed between them, fragile as spider silk, growing weaker with every second. Dorian could feel her life slipping away, could feel the wrongness in her blood corruption, mixing with something else, something ancient and powerful that had burned through her like wildfire. He looked at Finn, alive because of this stranger. Looked at the woman who'd chosen to die for a child she didn't know. His mate. His mate. Marcus. Dorian's command voice boomed through the forest, calling for his beta healers. Now. He stood, cradling the woman against his chest, and ran. His wolf wanted to stay, to protect, to guard both their mate and their son, but moving was survival. The palace was 10 miles north. He could make it in 15 minutes at full speed. Behind him, his pack emerged from the trees, Marcus lifting Finn with gentle efficiency. But Dorian's focus had narrowed to the fading heartbeat against his chest, to the mate bond, stretching thinner with every stride. "Stay with me," he commanded, his wolf bleeding into his voice, making it resonate with alpha power. "That's an order. You don't get to save him and then leave. You stay. Do you hear me? You stay." The universe had finally given him a mate, and Dorian would be damned if he let death take her. Before he even learned her name, Lila drowned in darkness for 3 days. The palace healers worked in shifts around her bed, their faces growing more drawn with each passing hour. They'd seen battle wounds before, corruption injuries, even dark magic poisoning. But this was all of those things and something else entirely, something that made Elder Myra's hands tremble as she examined the unconscious woman's blood. "The physical wounds are healing," Mira reported to the Alpha King, who hadn't left the woman's bedside since carrying her through the palace doors. "But there's corruption in her veins, Your Majesty. And something fighting it. Something I've only read about in texts so old. They're written in the forgotten tongue." Dorian didn't respond. His hand remained wrapped around his mate's, his thumb tracing circles on her too pale skin. The mate bond between them stretched so thin it was nearly transparent. He'd been pouring his own strength through that connection for 3 days, anchoring her to life through sheer force of will. He couldn't lose her. Not when he'd just found her. Finn maintained his own vigil from a chair pulled close to the other side of the bed. The boy's physical injuries had healed with the miraculous speed of young wolves, leaving only thin scars on his throat and chest. But he refused to leave the woman who'd saved him. "She promised," Finn whispered for the 100th time, his small hand resting on the woman's arm. "The pretty lady promised she wouldn't leave me." In the depths of her coma, Lila heard him. But she couldn't respond, couldn't claw her way back to consciousness. She was caught between worlds, drowning in memories and visions that felt more real than the distant voices calling her name. Her mother's face, gaunt with grief and fear, pressing a trembling hand to young Lila's chest. "Hide it, my darling. The gift is too dangerous. They killed the last soul weaver, burned her alive in the capital square. Promise me you'll hide it. Promise me." The execution platform. Her father's steady voice even as they fitted the noose. "Your power isn't a curse, little moon. It's a choice. Never let them convince you otherwise." The night her mother died, lungs simply giving up, grief having consumed her from the inside. Lila had felt it, felt the life draining away, felt her gift reaching out instinctively to pull her mother back. But Lady Carrington had grabbed her daughter's wrist with surprising strength. "Let me go. Let me go to him. And you run, Lila. You hide. You survive." 3 years of hiding. 3 years of choosing invisibility over existence. And then the forest clearing. The cubs' dying cries. The choice to matter just once, even if it killed her. The vision shifted, became something stranger. White wolves, dozens of them, their fur gleaming like starlight. They stood in a circle around a woman with platinum hair who knelt in grass that glowed silver beneath her hands. The woman looked up, and Lila saw her own face. But older, marked with swirling patterns that seemed to move beneath her skin. The white wolves bowed. "The weaver returns," a voice said, ancient and vast as mountains. The corruption grows. The choice is yours, hide or heal. Die or transform. You cannot remain between worlds forever. Child of moonlight. Choose. "I choose," Lila tried to say, but the words wouldn't come. In the palace, her fingers twitched in Dorian's grip. Finn gasped, leaning forward. She moved. "Papa," she moved. Elder Mira rushed back to the bedside, checking vitals with practiced efficiency. The corruption in the woman's blood was changing, transmuting into something else. Something that made the air around her shimmer like heat waves. By the old gods, Mira breathed. She's not dying. She's transforming. Dorian's grip tightened. Through the mate bond, he felt something shift, a spark catching flame, his mate's consciousness swimming toward the surface. Come back, he commanded, letting his alpha power bleed into the words. Come back to us. In the darkness, Lila heard him. And for the first time in 3 days, she tried. Lila woke to softness. Silk sheets against her skin, so different from the rough wool blankets of her border market life, that for a moment she thought she was still dreaming. The room around her was enormous. High ceilings with carved beams, windows that let in afternoon light filtered through gauzy curtains, furniture that looked like it cost more than she'd earned in 3 years of exile. And a small white-haired boy sleeping in a chair beside her bed, his hand stretched out as if he'd been holding hers before exhaustion claimed him. Lila's breath caught. The cub, the clearing, the corrupted direwolf, and the choice that should have killed her. She tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her torso, dulled by healing, but still present, a reminder of claws that had torn her open. Her shoulder throbbed where teeth had ground against bone. The movement made the boy's eyes flutter open. They were ice blue, striking against his pale features, and they lit up with joy the moment he saw her. You're awake. He launched himself at her, all 5-year-old enthusiasm and 0 regard for her injuries. You're awake. Papa said you would, but I was scared you wouldn't, and you promised. You promised you wouldn't leave. Finn. Gentle. The voice came from the doorway, deep and commanding and achingly familiar. Even though Lila had never heard it before. The man who entered made the enormous room feel small. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes the color of winter storms. He moved with the unconscious grace of a predator, power radiating from him in waves that made Lila's wolf whimper in recognition. Alpha. This was an alpha. But it was more than that. The moment their eyes met, something slammed into Lila's chest, a connection so intense it stole her breath, a pull that felt like gravity had suddenly doubled. The mate bond, her instincts screamed. This was the mate bond she'd heard about in stories, but never expected to feel. No, this wasn't possible. Easy, the alpha said, approaching slowly as if she were a spooked animal. Which Lila supposed she was. You're safe. You're in the Vale Palace. I'm Dorian Vale. This is my son, Finn. You saved his life 3 days ago. 3 days. Lila had been unconscious for 3 days. In a palace. The Vale Palace. The Alpha King, she whispered and watched Dorian's jaw tighten. Yes. He crouched beside the bed, bringing himself to her eye level. And you're my mate. I felt it the moment I touched you in that clearing. You feel it too, don't you? Lila's first instinct was denial. Her second was flight. She tried to throw back the covers, tried to get out of bed, her mind already racing through escape plans even as her body screamed that this was a terrible idea. She made it exactly 2 steps before her legs gave out. Dorian caught her before she hit the floor, his arms gentle despite their strength, and that simple kindness, after 3 years of no one touching her, no one caring if she lived or died, shattered something inside Lila's chest. She broke. 3 years of grief poured out in ragged sobs for her father's execution, for her mother's death, for the life that had been stolen and the person she'd been forced to become. She cried. For the loneliness, for the fear, for every morning she'd woken up wishing she hadn't. Dorian held her through it all, one hand cradling her head against his chest, the other wrapped protectively around her shaking shoulders. He didn't tell her to stop. Didn't tell her it would be okay. He just held her, steady as stone, while she fell apart. When the storm finally passed, Lila found herself still in his arms, Finn pressed against her side. And for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't alone. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would the universe give you me? I'm nobody. I'm nothing. You're everything," Dorian said simply. "You're the woman who threw herself at a corrupted direwolf to save my son. You're my mate. And when you're ready, I'd very much like to know your name." The first week, Lila could barely walk the length of her room without exhaustion dragging her back to bed. By the second week, she made it to the gardens. By the third, she was strong enough to protest when Finn appeared at dawn with another treasure for her collection. "It's a rock," Lila said, examining the perfectly ordinary stone he'd placed reverently on her nightstand beside 17 others. "It's a special rock," Finn insisted, crawling onto her bed with the ease of a child who'd decided she belonged to him. "See the sparkly bits? That means it's magic," Elder Mira said. "Magic is everywhere if you know how to look." Lila's throat tightened. She'd been the ghost woman for 3 years, someone children whispered about, avoided, feared. Now this little boy brought her rocks and stories and absolutely refused to believe she was anything less than the bravest person he'd ever met. "Thank you," she said softly, adding the rock to her collection. "It's perfect." Finn beamed and launched into a detailed explanation of his theory about why some rocks were magicer than others, a word he'd apparently invented and was very proud of. Dorian found them like that an hour later, Finn curled against Lila's side, still talking while she listened with the patience of someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed. The Alpha King leaned against the doorframe, something warm and painful twisting in his chest at the sight. His mate. His son. His family, if Lila would let it be. He'd been courting her carefully, bringing her meals he'd learned she favored, sitting with her in comfortable silence when words felt too heavy, giving her space when the mate bond's pull became overwhelming. He wanted her, gods, he wanted her with an intensity that sometimes stole his breath, but he'd wait. She'd spent 3 years believing she was worthless. Dorian would spend however long it took proving she was everything. "Papa." Finn spotted him and waved. "Lila says I can teach her about magic or rocks." "A valuable education," Dorian said gravely, earning a giggle from his son and a small, genuine smile from Lila that made his wolf preen. These moments were becoming more frequent. The smiles. The laughter. The slow thawing of a woman who'd been frozen in survival mode for too long. Elder Myra's lessons helped. The ancient healer had identified Lila's gift within days of her waking, soul-weaving, a power that appeared once in 1,000 years, always in times of great darkness. "You're not cursed," Mira had explained during their first session, her gnarled hands steady as she guided Lila through meditation. "You're a transmuter. Death passes through you and becomes life. Corruption becomes purity. It's the rarest gift our kind has ever known." "It hurts," Lila had whispered. "It feels like burning alive from the inside." "Because you're fighting it. Your mother taught you to hide, to suppress, to fear what you are. But suppression creates pressure. Control comes from acceptance." The training was grueling. Mira taught Lila to sense the life force in living things, the steady pulse of trees, the quick flutter of birds, the deep thrum of earth. Taught her to touch that energy without taking it, to channel it without letting it consume her. Some days Lila succeeded. Other days she collapsed, overwhelmed, convinced she'd never master something so fundamental to her nature. Dorian was always there when she fell. Steady hands catching her. Quiet strength anchoring her. the mate bond between them growing stronger with each passing day, each small trust, each moment Lila let herself believe she might deserve this. "I killed people," she confessed one night, the words spilling out in the darkness of her room, where Dorian had brought her tea after a particularly difficult training session. During the fight with the direwolf, "I drained its corruption, but I also drained its life. I killed it." "You saved my son," Dorian said simply. "That doesn't make me less of a monster. It makes you a mother." He set down the tea and took her hands, his touch gentle despite his strength. "You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. That's not monstrous. That's heroic." Lila wanted to believe him. Some days, when Finn laughed at her stories or Dorian's eyes softened when he looked at her, she almost did. The whispers started in the third week. Lila heard them during her first formal dinner in the Great Hall, low voices that cut off when she approached, eyes that tracked her movements with suspicion rather than curiosity. She'd spent 3 years being invisible, and she recognized the shift immediately. People were talking about her, and not kindly. "The ghost woman," someone murmured as she passed. "Strange timing, isn't it? She appears just when corrupted beasts start attacking." "I heard she's the daughter of traitors," another voice added. "The Carringtons. Her father was executed for poisoning council members." Lila's steps faltered. They knew. Somehow, someone had connected the pale herbalist to the disgraced noble family, and now the court was drawing conclusions that made her stomach turn. Lady Helena stood at the center of a cluster of nobles, her expression sympathetic in a way that felt like a blade wrapped in silk. "I'm sure there's an explanation," she said, loud enough to carry. "Perhaps the Alpha King should investigate before making any permanent decisions about our future Luna." The title hung in the air like an accusation. Lila saw the calculation in Helena's eyes, understood immediately. This was a woman who'd expected her daughter to become Dorian's chosen mate, who'd been building political alliances based on that assumption. Lila's presence destroyed years of careful planning, and Helena intended to destroy her in return. Dorian found Lila in the gardens an hour later, sitting beneath a willow tree, her hands trembling in her lap. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and waited. "They know who I am," Lila finally whispered. "What I am. The daughter of traitors. A wielder of forbidden magic. They think I'm here to destroy you from the inside." "Let them think what they want," Dorian said, but his jaw was tight. "I know the truth." "Do you?" Lila turned to face him. "My father was accused of poisoning 3 council members with blood magic. He was executed for it. What if he actually did it? What if this power runs in families and your father was framed?" Dorian's voice was certain. "I was there, Lila. At the trial. I was only 20, newly confirmed as Alpha King, and I watched them railroad a good man because the council needed a scapegoat. Your father's only crime was arguing that blood magic shouldn't be universally forbidden, that some gifts, used correctly, could heal rather than harm." Lila stared at him. "You knew my father?" "I knew of him. And I knew the charges were false. But I was too young, too new to my position to challenge the council." Regret shadowed his features. "I'm sorry I couldn't save him." Before Lila could respond, Marcus, Dorian's beta, burst into the gardens, his expression grim. "Your Majesty, we have a problem." The scouts' reports were worse than anyone anticipated. 5 corrupted beasts had been spotted along the Vale borders in the past week alone. 2 had been killed, but 3 remained at large. More concerning was the pattern. Each attack occurred near populated areas, as if something was deliberately driving the creatures toward wolf territories. Elder Mira spread a map across Dorian's desk, her ancient fingers marking each attack site. Here, here, and here. All within 20 miles of the palace. All within the last month. Since Lila arrived, Helena said from her position near the door, her voice carefully neutral. Several court members nodded agreement. Since Finn was attacked, Dorian corrected sharply. The corruption started before Lila came. Here. But Mira wasn't finished. She traced a line connecting the attack sites, her expression troubled. There's something else. These creatures, they're not just corrupted. They're designed. The dark magic that twisted them follows specific patterns, patterns I've only seen in ancient texts. About soul weavers. Lila felt ice settle in her stomach. What do you mean, designed? I mean someone created them specifically to target your gift. Myra's eyes were grave. Corrupted beasts are fatal to normal wolves. But to a soul weaver? They're a test. Fight them. And die from the corruption. Absorb them and risk becoming a monster yourself. Either way, the creator wins. Someone knows what I am, Lila breathed. Someone wants me dead. Or worse. Or, Dorian said quietly, his alpha power bleeding into his voice, someone wants to force you into using your gift until you lose control. Until you become the monster they can justify destroying. He turned to Marcus. Double the patrols. I want every corrupted beast found and contained. And find out who's creating them. But even as he gave orders, Lila saw the truth in his eyes. The enemy wasn't just at their borders. They were already inside, waiting for her to break. The autumn feast should have been a celebration. The great hall blazed with candlelight tables, groaned under the weight of roasted meats and harvest vegetables, and the court had gathered in their finest silks to honor the season's bounty. Lila stood at Dorian's side, uncomfortable in borrowed finery, hyper-aware of the whispers that followed her wherever she moved. Then the windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and screaming. The corrupted alpha that crashed through the palace defenses was massive, easily twice the size of the dire wolf that had nearly killed her, with muscles that rippled beneath for the color of oil slick. Its eyes burned with that same sickly green light, but brighter, more aware. This wasn't a mindless beast. This was a weapon, and it had a target. Finn. The boy stood frozen near the head table, his ice-blue eyes wide with terror as the creature's gaze locked onto him. The same boy who died once already, who'd been saved by a stranger's sacrifice, who brought her rocks and called her brave. Lila's body moved before her mind caught up. She threw herself between Finn and the corrupted alpha, her arms spread wide despite having no weapons, no armor, nothing but the gift she'd spent 3 years hiding and 4 weeks learning to control. Lila, no. Dorian's voice cracked with command and fear, but she was already reaching for her power. The corrupted alpha lunged. Its claws raked toward her chest, toward Finn behind her, and Lila grabbed its massive leg with both hands. The corruption slammed into her like a tidal wave, stronger than the direwolf, older, more deliberately twisted. It wanted to burn through her, to consume her, to turn her into the monster everyone feared she'd become. She felt it trying to flood her veins with darkness, felt her control slipping, felt the terrified screams of the court echoing around her. Asterisk, your power isn't a curse, little moon. It's a choice, asterisk. Lila made her choice. Instead of just absorbing the corruption, she transformed it. She pulled the dark magic into herself, not as a poison to be endured, but as raw energy to be transmuted. Her gift surged to life, not with the burning agony of before, but with a clean, fierce power that felt like moonlight made solid. The corruption passed through her and became pure life force. The twisted magic that had warped the creature unraveled, thread by thread, as Lila replaced it with her own essence. She could feel the wolf beneath the monster, frightened, in pain, desperate to be free. "I've got you," she whispered. "Come back." The great hall fell silent as the corrupted alpha's form began to shift. The sickly green light faded from its eyes. The oil slick fur brightened to pure silver. The unnatural size diminished to something that, while still massive, looked like it belonged in the natural world. When the transformation completed, a silver wolf stood before Lila, scarred, exhausted, but alive. Its eyes, now clear amber, met hers with an intelligence that made her breath catch. The wolf bowed. Not a threat display, not submission, but reverence. Then it limped toward the shattered windows and disappeared into the night. Lila's knees buckled. Dorian caught her before she fell, his arms steady around her shaking body, his heart pounding against her back where she leaned into his strength. The court stared. Hundreds of witnesses to what she was, what she could do. Lila waited for the fear, the accusations, the demands for her execution. Instead, Dorian turned her to face him, his winter storm eyes fierce and certain. He took her blood-stained hands in his, not flinching from the evidence of her power, not hesitating despite the entire court watching, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Will you be my mate?" His voice resonated with alpha command and something deeper. Something that was just him. "My Luna? My choice." Lila looked at Finn, who'd tackled her legs in a hug that nearly knocked her over. Looked at the court, where expressions ranged from awe to fear to grudging respect. Looked at Dorian, who'd seen exactly what she was and chosen her anyway. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of believing she was cursed, dangerous, unworthy of love. But she'd just saved a wolf's life instead of taking it. Had transformed corruption into healing in front of hundreds of witnesses. Had chosen to be brave enough to be seen. "Yes," Lila whispered, then stronger. "Yes." Dorian kissed her as the court erupted into cheers and gasps and shocked whispers, the mate bond blazing to life between them like a star being born. Lila Carrington had finally come home. The full moon hung heavy over the Vale Palace grounds, turning everything silver and sacred. Lila stood in the ceremonial circle, wearing white silk that seemed to glow in the moonlight, her platinum hair unbound and flowing past her shoulders. Dorian faced her, his expression fierce with love and pride, as Elder Mira began the ancient words that would bind them as mates. Finn watched from his place of honor, clutching a rock he declared was the magicest one yet to give Lila after the ceremony. He'd started calling her Mama 2 weeks ago, casual as breathing, and Lila had cried for an hour. As Dorian took her hands and spoke the vows that would complete their bond, movement at the forest's edge made the gathered court gasp. White wolves emerged from the mistwood. Dozens of them, their fur gleaming like starlight, their eyes ancient and knowing. They moved in perfect silence, forming a circle around the ceremony, an honor guard that hadn't appeared in living memory. The prophecy, Elder Mira breathed. The Soul Weaver has returned. But Lila barely heard her. She was focused on Dorian's steady gaze, on Finn's delighted laugh as he waved at the white wolves, on the mate bond blazing between her and the man who'd chosen her when she'd believed herself unchosen. "I love you," Dorian said, the words simple but weighted with absolute truth. "My mate. My Luna. My choice." "My choice too," Lila whispered back, and meant it with every fiber of her being. When their lips met, sealing the bond, the white wolves raised their muzzles and howled a sound of joy and recognition that echoed through the valley. Lila Carrington, daughter of traders, became Lila Vale, Luna of the most powerful pack in the realm. Not because prophecy demanded it, but because she'd chosen to be brave enough to be loved. In the shadows beyond the white wolves, a hooded figure watched the ceremony with calculating eyes. The Soul Weaver had accepted her destiny, which meant the true game could finally begin. The corrupted beasts had been merely a test. The real battle was just beginning. But tonight, Lila was surrounded by light, by love, by the family she'd found in the wreckage of everything she'd lost. And that, she thought as Finn crashed into her legs with a hug and Dorian's arms came around them both, was enough. For now, it was more than enough.